The story of Juan Pujol Garcia does not begin with secrets, codes, or spycraft. It begins with a man who seemingly had no place in the world he was determined to change. Born in Barcelona, raised among the chaos of a Spain constantly tearing itself apart, Pujol grew up with a quiet hatred for tyranny, not out of ideology, but out of instinct. He had no military training, no intelligence background, no political power, and no connections. He was an ordinary man shaped by extraordinary times, convinced that the world was sliding into darkness and that someone, anyone, had to stop it. He never saw himself as a hero. He was simply someone who refused to stand by. When the Spanish Civil War erupted, Pujol witnessed brutality from both sides, strengthening his conviction that fascism had to be defeated at any cost. But when World War II engulfed Europe, he realized that he, personally, had no means to join the fight. He was neither British nor American. He didn't speak German. He possessed no specialized skills, and yet, in his mind, none of this mattered. He believed he could serve the Allied cause if he simply willed it strongly enough. So he made a decision that would alter the course of the war. He would become a spy. Not someday, now. His first step was laughably simple and unbelievably bold. He attempted to volunteer for British intelligence directly. He walked into the British embassy in Madrid, uninvited and unknown, claiming he wanted to offer his service to His Majesty's government. MI6, baffled and suspicious, turned him away immediately. He tried again. Another refusal. A third time, he nearly begged them to let him help. Once again, they dismissed him. To them, Pujol was nothing, a random Spaniard with a suspicious eagerness and no qualifications. But instead of deterring him, the rejection convinced him of only one thing. If the British wouldn't take him, he would have to prove himself worthy. And so began one of the boldest improvisations in intelligence history. Pujol left Spain and traveled to Lisbon, the capital of neutral Portugal and the beating heart of World War II espionage. A city crawling with spies, double agents, smugglers, diplomats, traitors, and opportunists. If he couldn't enter the world of espionage through the front door, he would sneak in through the back. In Lisbon's smoky cafes, its labyrinth of safe houses, its hotels filled with diplomats and informants, Pujol prepared to launch his own private war. He didn't know how to spy. He didn't know where to start. But he understood one thing with absolute clarity. He was done waiting for permission. The world was burning, and he was going to fight the flames alone, armed with nothing but his imagination.
Juan Pujol Garcia entered the world of espionage the only way he could, by inventing himself. Lacking training, tradecraft, or even a proper plan, he realized he needed to do the unthinkable. Infiltrate the very intelligence service he hoped to deceive. And so, with no permission from the Allies and no guidance from anyone, Pujol approached the one organization desperate enough to accept a stranger offering his services, the German Abwehr. In Lisbon, he crafted a persona designed to appeal to Nazi ideology. A fiercely loyal Spanish patriot, sympathetic to fascism, eager to support the Axis cause. His fabricated zeal impressed the Germans. To them, Pujol seemed like a rare gem, an ideologically driven volunteer with access to neutral Spain and, supposedly, to British circles. By offering himself as a budding Nazi agent, he effectively reverse-engineered his way into the enemy's trust. The Abwehr recruited him, gave him basic instructions, and funded his first steps. What they did not realize was that the man they were celebrating was already plotting against them. While they imagined him as their future star informant, Pujol was quietly preparing to feed them lies. Lies so intricate and believable that even seasoned intelligence officers would swallow them whole. Armed with nothing more than determination, Pujol began sending his first fake intelligence reports to the Germans. The problem? He had absolutely no access to real British military information. He had never set foot in the United Kingdom. He didn't know where Allied logistics worked, where units were stationed, or even what British soldiers ate for breakfast. But instead of stopping him, this impossibility sparked his creativity. Pujol began scouring newspapers, movie reels, maps, and random travel brochures, anything that could help him construct a world convincing enough for German intelligence. His reports became stories built from scraps. Rail schedules copied from newspapers, troop movements inferred from gossip, made-up conversations he claimed to overhear from non-existent diplomats. He invented a code system, created phony contacts, forged tickets, forged documents, and even fabricated traces of military activity using nothing more than his imagination. The Germans found his reports astonishingly detailed. Every time he submitted a piece of information, they praised his dedication and access, unaware that none of it was real. Pujol had done what even trained spies struggled to achieve. He had gained the absolute trust of the Abwehr, and he had done it without ever leaving his room.
The deeper Juan Pujol Garcia sank into the world of espionage, the more he realized that surviving as a lone, self-taught double agent required something extraordinary. So, he created it. Piece by piece, character by character, he built an entire invisible intelligence network, an army that existed only in his mind and on paper. At first, it began with one imaginary sub-agent he claimed to supervise, then another, and another. Soon, Pujol was managing 27 fictional operatives scattered across Europe and the United Kingdom, each with a carefully crafted biography, personality, and motivation. Some were sailors who traveled between ports. Others were civil servants, soldiers, pilots, hotel workers, or businessmen. He wrote about their families, their illnesses, their habits, their careers, their frustrations, all with the precision of a novelist constructing an epic saga. For every character, he maintained letters, receipts, schedules, and reports, all of which were fake, yet perfectly believable. To the Abwehr, this was not a man spinning fantasies. This was a master handler with a vast intelligence empire. His superiors marveled at his ability to coordinate such a far-reaching spy network. They praised his productivity and analytical skill. They never questioned how a single Spaniard could maintain such a powerful and efficient unit in complete secrecy. In their eyes, his network was alive. In truth, it existed only in typewritten pages and in his extraordinary imagination. But Pujol's genius did not lie merely in creating agents. It lay in making them behave realistically. His fictional operatives made mistakes, missed messages, got delayed by weather, had emotional breakdowns, and sometimes failed their missions outright. Their human imperfections made the network breathe. When Pujol wanted to stop sending reports temporarily, he would kill off an imaginary agent or send him to the hospital. When he needed to explain conflicting information, he blamed rivalries or misunderstandings between his fictional subordinates. And every one of these invented dramas only deepened German trust. The Abwehr sent him money to pay these imaginary spies. Pujol pocketed it, then requested even more to support their operations. He built a web of lies so complex that even professional analysts struggled to track it. Yet the Germans believed every word, convinced they were funding one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in Europe. What none of them realized was that their prized network, this vast, efficient machine feeding them inside knowledge, was nothing more than a brilliant performance. One man, working alone in Lisbon, had created a phantom army powerful enough to fool the Third Reich.
By early 1942, Juan Pujol Garcia's reports were causing confusion in places he had never imagined. Somewhere inside the British intelligence structure, analysts reviewing intercepted German communications kept noticing references to a mysterious agent who seemed to possess uncanny access to Allied operations. This agent, known only by a German code name, reported troop movements, shipping routes, military morale, and political developments with confidence and detail. Yet the British could not match this supposed super spy to any real intelligence leaks. Nothing he reported corresponded with classified damage. His intelligence was precise enough to look credible, but vague enough to be harmless. Someone, somewhere, was playing a strange game. Then MI6 and the Double Cross Committee discovered the truth. The phantom super spy was one man in Lisbon, feeding an entire intelligence service with fiction. And more importantly, he was doing it for the Allies. Suddenly, the man they had dismissed as a fantasist, a nobody from nowhere, became the most interesting wild card in the War of Shadows. MI6 reached out, quietly, carefully. They needed to know who he really was and what exactly he was trying to do. When Pujol walked into the British legation in Lisbon for the fourth time, he expected another polite rejection. Instead, he received an invitation. A British intelligence officer sat him down, offered him tea, and began asking questions, not to dismiss him, but to understand him. How did he fool the Abwehr? How many agents did he claim to run? What information had he already sent? And most importantly, what did he want? Pujol answered with the honesty of a man who had been waiting years for someone to finally recognize the value of his work. He admitted that everything he sent to the Germans was fabricated. He revealed that he hated fascism and simply wanted to help stop the war. He explained the fictional network he had built from scratch, 27 agents across Europe, detailed biographies, correspondence, and logistics, all crafted by hand. MI6 officers were stunned. They had never encountered anything like it. Not only had Pujol fooled the Abwehr, he had done so without any training, support, or supervision. The British understood instantly. This man was either a delusional genius or a once-in-a-generation intelligence asset. They chose the latter. MI6 formally brought him into the double-cross system, transported him to London, and gave him a code name worthy of his talent, GARBO, after the actress Greta Garbo, because no one in the war played more roles or played them better.
When Garbo finally became a fully integrated part of British intelligence, he stepped into a world where creativity was as lethal as any weapon. The XX Committee, the nerve center of Britain's deception war, was unlike anything he had seen. It operated like a bizarre mixture of theater troupe, newsroom, and war room. Analysts, code breakers, psychologists, and military planners sat together weaving illusions with the precision of surgeons. Their mission was not to gather intelligence, but to sculpt the enemy's worldview, one believable lie at a time. Garbo's fabricated network of 27 agents became the perfect raw material for this machine. MI6 loved its complexity, but more importantly, they saw how it could be weaponized. They assigned him a team to refine, expand, and systematize his mythology. Every agent of his now received backstory files, psychological profiles, cross-referenced travel logs, and believable communication patterns. The British didn't just accept his illusion, they improved it, adding logistical realism that made the network appear not merely plausible, but indispensable to the German war effort. The transformation was staggering. Before London, Pujol had been a lone dreamer, typing deceptions in cheap Lisbon cafes, desperately trying to outsmart the Abwehr with limited resources. Now he operated with the full power of the British Empire behind him. His reports were carefully timed with real events, so that the harmless information he provided came true just often enough to make German intelligence trust him implicitly. The British even helped kill off some of his fictional agents, giving them tragic fates, funerals, and mourning associates to maintain dramatic consistency. Soon, the Abwehr was convinced that Garbo's invisible army was the crown jewel of its spy network. Every message he sent was read at the highest German command levels. And because MI6 controlled every word, Garbo effectively became an architect of the German worldview, feeding Berlin just enough truth to earn respect and just enough fiction to guide them toward strategic disaster. Through London's deception apparatus, a man who once had no training, no connections, and no credibility evolved into one of the most powerful manipulators of the war. Proof that in intelligence, imagination could be deadlier than steel.
The moment Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo, became central to Operation Fortitude, his work entered a realm where a single message could alter the fate of millions. By 1944, the Allies were preparing for their most ambitious undertaking of the war, the invasion of Western Europe. Its success depended on one critical factor: convincing Hitler that the landings would not take place in Normandy, but in the Pas de Calais, far to the north. Garbo's fictional spy network, already trusted and admired by German intelligence, became the cornerstone of this illusion. Every report he produced had to be perfectly calibrated, detailed enough to be believable, vague enough to avoid giving away real Allied movements, and timed with an actor's instinct for tension. MI5 analysts fed him threads of truth that posed no risk, and from them he wove intricate tapestries of deception. His imaginary agents described troop buildups, fuel depots, and training exercises for armies that did not exist, while referencing real units just enough to anchor his lies in reality. As the Allied deception planners layered visual decoys, fake radio traffic, and the phantom 1st United States Army Group under Patton, Garbo became its voice, the insider source the Germans believed above all others.
When D-Day finally arrived on June 6, 1944, Garbo executed his most dangerous lie. Just before dawn, as Allied soldiers were landing on the beaches of Normandy, he sent an urgent message to the Germans, deliberately too late to be acted upon, warning that the invasion was underway, but framing it as a diversion, the opening feint of a much larger assault still to come at Calais. His timing was genius, early enough to maintain the Germans' trust, late enough to ensure his warning could not alter the course of events. The Germans accepted his explanation entirely. Even as reports poured in confirming the scale of the Normandy invasion, the Abwehr remained convinced it was a trap. Hitler himself refused to release armored divisions stationed near Calais for weeks, waiting for the real invasion that Garbo had promised would arrive. That phantom strike never came. Because of one man and his fabricated network, Germany kept its most powerful reserves idle during the most critical moment of the Western Front. The Allies seized a foothold in France, expanded it, and began the push toward Berlin. Garbo's lie, the most consequential falsehood of the entire war, had held back the Wehrmacht at the decisive hour, proving that in modern warfare, imagination could overpower armies.
By late 1944, Juan Pujol Garcia had become something that should never have existed in a global war. A man simultaneously honored by both sides, each convinced he had served them faithfully. To the Germans, Arabelle remained their crown jewel, an agent whose network had grown to legendary proportions, whose reports were so detailed and so emotionally grounded in the everyday lives of his fictional subagents that the Abwehr felt they were reading the diary of Britain itself. His carefully crafted fabrications during Operation Fortitude were considered masterpieces of intelligence work. Berlin believed that his warnings, particularly about the phantom 1st United States Army Group supposedly massing under Patton in Kent, were the only consistent thread of clarity in a sea of contradictory wartime noise. When D-Day unfolded exactly as Pujol had led them to expect, a supposed feint before the real invasion at Pas de Calais, his reputation soared. Even after the Allies had already broken through in Normandy, Pujol continued feeding reports that kept German divisions immobilized in the north, convincing High Command that the main blow was still coming. His influence became so significant that the German High Command awarded him the Iron Cross, an extraordinary honor rarely bestowed upon non-Germans, let alone someone they believed risked his life daily for the Reich. The irony was almost theatrical. They decorated a man whose genius had crippled their ability to fight the very war they entrusted him to shape. To the British, meanwhile, Pujol, now codenamed Garbo, was a living embodiment of what MI5's double-cross system aspired to be, a weapon of deception so flawless that it bent armies, strategies, and entire fronts without firing a single bullet. British intelligence officers watched with astonishment as his fabrications reshaped the German order of battle. The more the Germans praised him, the more MI5 realized they had built something unprecedented. A double agent so trusted that even bold contradictions in his reports were accepted as truth. For his contribution to Operation Fortitude, which Eisenhower later said saved thousands of Allied lives, Pujol received the MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire. But the recognition came with a shadow. Both sides now considered him invaluable. One of them, sooner or later, would learn the truth. British handlers quietly warned him that German intelligence, facing collapse, might search for explanations and scapegoats. A double agent is safest only while both sides believe the illusion, and with the war nearing its end, the illusion would soon break. As he accepted his British medal in a discreet ceremony, Pujol realized he was standing at the edge of a precipice. He had pulled off the most extraordinary deception of the century, but survival required a final act. If he wanted to live, the greatest spy of World War II would need to disappear as convincingly as any of the fictional agents he created. When the war finally ground to a halt in 1945, Juan Pujol Garcia faced a truth far more dangerous than anything he had confronted during his years as GARBO. The Germans, still unaware that their celebrated agent, Arabelle, had been a British creation from the start, would eventually uncover the deception as archives were captured and interrogations intensified. And while the Nazi regime was collapsing, its remnants, scattered intelligence officers, rogue loyalists, and die-hard believers could still seek vengeance on the man who had helped orchestrate the greatest strategic humiliation in their military history. British intelligence understood the magnitude of the danger. They quietly arranged for Pujol's disappearance, working with him to craft a final, convincing illusion: the death of the world's most successful double agent. Reports were seeded across Europe that he had died in Africa from malaria. Friends, contacts, even former MI5 colleagues believed the story. His family was informed through carefully filtered channels. Official documents were produced, stamped, and filed. And just like that, the man who had manipulated armies and deceived empires ceased to exist. GARBO, the spy who had lived in the shadows for years, finally vanished into them entirely, leaving behind nothing but a memory and a grave that didn't contain a body. In reality, Pujol resurfaced quietly in Venezuela, adopting a life that bore no resemblance to the one he had lived during the war. He ran a modest bookshop, taught language classes, and built a quiet existence under a new identity. No secret meetings, no coded messages, no imaginary networks. For decades he lived this way, the world believing him long dead, and he allowed that belief to stand because anonymity was his last and greatest shield. Only in the 1980s did a British historian, after years of research, trace scattered hints toward the truth and discover that the legendary GARBO was alive. When reporters and intelligence veterans eventually reached him, they found a humble, soft-spoken man who expressed no pride in having deceived two of the world's most powerful intelligence services. He insisted that he had never sought medals or glory, only an end to the war that had consumed his generation. What he accomplished through lies and illusions saved thousands of Allied soldiers, delayed German reinforcements, and reshaped the greatest military operation of the 20th century. Yet he regarded his story as a simple act of conscience. In the end, Juan Pujol Garcia remained what he had always been, a ghost who emerged from nowhere, changed the course of history, and returned to the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the undisputed legacy of the most influential spy who never fired a shot.